So my wife and I have just recorded our first episode of our podcast together, and we took a bunch of questions from you guys. And a lot of your questions revolve around the topics of how do you keep the spark alive? How do you always find new topics of conversation? How do you keep your relationship rich and fulfilling? And how do you collaborate and align and agree on really difficult, differing topics and differing beliefs that a lot of you guys have to create a better sense of goal alignment? So in this video, I'm going to show you a part of the program that I have never shared on YouTube before. And the reason why I've never shared on YouTube before is that there's a lot of things we teach in our program that are very advanced, that are very abstract. And I think you will see as you watch this video how abstract this can become, and it requires you to think very deeply. So I'm going to run the risk of having a lot of people misunderstand this video, because I really want to show you guys this other side to the program that has really blown my mind and when I realized it, and really blew the minds of a lot of our clients. And this is really a lot of the keys to how to create and grow spark in very enriching relationships, how you can effortlessly get success in your own life, not only just in relationship, but in your career, financially, how you can be more in harmony with the self and the world, how you can get to what we call a state of deep understanding, so a deeper version of understanding and deep compassion, both internal and external, how you can get deep alignment, admiration, passion. So basically beyond safety and the higher levels of the 5 pillars that I teach, and how you can create ultimately a very adaptable and what we call an anti-fragile relationship, where for a lot of couples, their honeymoon period is really the best period of the relationship. But for us and for my clients, the honeymoon period in the beginning is really the worst, because it just keeps getting better and better from there. So this is, again, the secret that I have not shown on YouTube before. As you progress in this video, I need you to make sure to think very deeply, to reflect very deeply, be very honest with yourself, because if not, this can easily be misunderstood, and you are going to take this really effective weapon that I'm giving you and go in the wrong direction and use it to hurt yourself rather than to use it for good. Okay. So if you want more content about topics that allow you to create thriving relationships in your marriage, whether you're trying to reconcile right now or trying to just better your relationship to, the most fulfilling state that it can be, feel free to subscribe to this channel and click the bell button as well to be notified when I post new videos every single week. And again, if you want to apply for the Relationships Revival program, then feel free to also stick around to the end of that masterclass so you can and if you want to submit your application for the Relationships Revival program, we talk about for 20 minutes about how to apply for the program at the end of the masterclass. So if you want to apply for the program, be sure to join the masterclass first as well. And I promise you guys, this is not something you'll ever see in any other YouTube videos, in any other books, because I've never seen this discussed anywhere else in my research. And this has taken me 8 years of relentless research with psychologists, with philosophers, with neuroscientists to really understand and to really be able to teach you today. And before we get to the meat, I just want to give this preface in that this topic is discussed over many, many hours in our program, and I'm trying to distill it down to an hour plus video for you guys. I want this video to show you guys just how advanced the conversation around internal shifts can actually get. And there are many things in this video that cannot be said in this shortened version. There's going to be a lot of people who are going to misunderstand this video, who are going to take the wrong things out of the video. So I expect a lot of questions, a lot of comments, a lot of thoughts being shared in the comment section. And please, if you have any questions, let us know, because this is a very crucial thing for you to fully understand. And misunderstanding this can be very, very dangerous if you apply it in the wrong ways. But when you understand this, guys, this will really unleash your life to the next level in more ways than you can imagine. So this is a massive one, guys. Do not take this lightly. So before we can understand the main topic of this video, we need to understand this concept that we call the mental prison. So the main question is, do you live in a mental prison? Because a lot of people, they live in this mental prison and they don't even know they're living in this mental prison. And this mental prison is really fucking up so much of their life and their relationship and robbing themselves of so much potential, as you'll see in a bit. But basically, there is 5 stages to how you form this mental prison in your mind. So let's start with stage one here. It's what I call the formation of mental scales. So bear with me. Our human brain can seem very, very complex. But if you were to break it down to its simplest mechanics of how our human brain works, our human brain is just really a sophisticated and complex comparison machine. Here's what I mean by that. So we have polar opposites here on this list. So we have good and bad, light and dark, white and black, peace, war, whatever it is. It can go on forever. Now, the only way we can understand that our human brain can understand any of these things is if we understand what the opposite means. So, for example, we cannot understand what light means until we have understood what dark means. If there's no such thing as dark, there's no such thing as light. Without peace, there is no war. And without war, there is no peace, or we can't understand each other. And a great example of this is, I've spent with time with some people who have been through some very near-death experiences. And when they go through really near-death experiences, that is usually when they really understand and they really value, they really fully grasp the full spectrum of what life means. Before that near-death experience, they understand life conceptually, but they don't understand the full value of what life actually means, right? So once they understand death, then they can understand life, and so on and so on. Without pleasure, you cannot feel pain. And when you have pain, you cannot also feel pleasure. So I want you to pause there and really think about how our human brain can only understand the full value of something when our human brain has something to compare it to, when it understands the opposite. When we take away the opposite, suddenly our brain will not be able to fully understand the true value and meaning of that thing. Now, let me take this even further, because our minds can only make sense, understand something when it has another subject or object to compare to. Without that reference, that thing will cause us to be extremely confused, and we're not going to be able to process the information properly. So let me give you an example here. If I tell you right now, this weight is as heavy as 2 sacks, that sentence, can you tell me whether this weight is heavy or not? Not really. But what if I told you 1 sack is 10 pounds or 10 kg, depending on where you are? Suddenly, with this point of reference, you have a much better understanding of how heavy or light that thing is. But without this point of reference, you don't understand this. So, because your brain now can compare the weight to something that weighs 10 pounds or kg and use that as a reference. So again, here, once the reference is made, you understand the subject more. So once the anti-subject is created, you understand the subject, the value of the subject more. Another one, another example, right? This lamp costs 50,000 rupiah. And rupiah is the Indonesian currency, which is where I'm from. If I tell you that, that sounds like a lot to a lot of you probably. If you don't know what rupiah is, that sounds like a lot. But if I tell you 1 USD is about 10,000, I think now it's like 15,000 rupiah. So this is really $5. So before, if I ask you this, is this lamp cheap or expensive? I don't know, because I have nothing to compare rupiah to reference rupiah with. But once I give you a reference, I can say, okay, $5 for a lamp, that's like, a Starbucks coffee. That's pretty cheap. A lamp for a Starbucks coffee, right? That's another reference. So again, your brain now can understand the true value of the lamp because I gave you the reference. Don't overcomplicate this, but the point is then, again, without that reference or something for our minds to compare that thing to, our human minds cannot comprehend or process the information very well. Because again, our mind is just a complex comparison machine. That is how our minds make sense of things. We compare it to things. We refer to things. So if we understand this is how our mind works, then a simple way we can represent our mind, the beliefs we have in our mind, is as a simple scale like this. So if let's say this is our about lying, right? This is our belief about lying. So here, what we're saying basically is lying is bad, right? Now, when we form this understanding, this belief that lying is bad, then the existence of one scale guarantees the existence of a mirror scale. So here, if we think lying is bad, then we also think here the opposite, right? The opposite scale is not lying is good. You see? So think about this as any beliefs you have, whether that's a type of food that you eat. So let's say you say now instead of lying, you say something as simple as like sushi is bad, right? Not sushi is good, right? So it makes it simple. Raw food tastes bad. Cooked food is good, right? So it's very simple. Just don't overcomplicate this for now. Now, I want you to imagine this. For every single belief you have in your life, every single opinion, every single belief, every single thing that lives in your mind, your paradigms, is represented in a scale, and each scale has an opposite scale. And our minds are just a collection of countless, infinite of these scales. And all these scales, the totality of the scales represent all your overall belief in life. Okay? Now, what happens though is that when we live life, we form these mental scales, but the dangerous part begins when we tip these mental scales. So we talked about this in the previous videos. So if you haven't watched the previous ones, this is not going to make too much sense for you, but we talk about how anything we do that gets us an outcome is based on an emotion. And any emotion we feel is based on how we interpret something, and how we interpret something is based on our paradigms. And the way our paradigms work is that it's either poisoned or not poisoned by the big 14 mind viruses, like the VMs, DODs, BPV, layers, etc. So these VMs, these DODs, these BPV layers, these big 14 mind viruses, those are actually just simply, if you think about it, beliefs in your mind. So here's what happens. Every single interpretation we have about some event is basically us essentially placing a weight on one side of a scale. So let's say the subject again is sushi. Okay, let's make it very simple, sushi. So let's say in the beginning, we have one bad experience with sushi. So let's make this very simple like this. So we had one bad experience with sushi. And that a bad experience leads us to interpret that bad experience as like, oh, I don't like sushi. Sushi is not good. That is basically us placing a weight on the negative side of sushi. Sushi is not good. If we have another bad experience that leads to another bad interpretation, we will put another weight. Again, good example again, right? Tough love here. So sometimes our clients who come in, they think that they see our tough love and they don't like it. So it's not that the tough love itself is bad or good, but the way they interpret it is bad. So they put a weight on the negative side. Now, once they put a weight on that side, it creates the opposite mirror scale, and it puts a weight on that opposite mirror scale. So now, if the opposite of tough love maybe is just supportive and kindness and softness, let's say softness, not kindness. Once we place a weight on this side, we will place naturally this softness scale comes up, and we put a weight on the opposite side. So if you don't understand this, just think about any beliefs you have in life. Any belief you have in life is basically formed or created by past experiences you've had about that thing. So whether that's your opinion about politics, opinion about gun control, opinions about your partner, everything is created because you place weights on one side of one side of a scale, and these weights are placed because of how we interpret something. Because again, there are some examples of clients who, when we give them tough love, they actually stack a weight on this side. Because the event is the same, they get tough love, but they interpret the tough love as a good thing, as something they want more of. And so that will create more something like this, where I want more tough love, but I want less softness. So if you are having a hard time understanding this, think about all the beliefs you have formed in your life and really think about how those beliefs came about, and you'll see that it's just you placing weights on one side of the scale or another on various topics. And when we place weights on the scale like this, we begin to prime ourselves for confirmation bias to keep placing weights on the same side. So if you, for example, hate tough love or hate sushi, the odds of you placing a weight on the positive side of sushi in the future is much lower than you placing weights on the negative side. Once you form that belief, your confirmation bias is going to start to have you place more weights on this side of the scale without you often realizing it. And when primed, we can now make new interpretations and thus place more weights without even new events happening. And one example of how this confirmation bias can actually happen. So for me, for example, I used to always define myself as very introverted. I don't like a lot of people who brag. I don't like a lot of people who are, I was part of the hate the rich movement. I hate people who are rich because I thought they were just assholes. Well, what happens is I stopped hanging around people who are rich, right? And I started hanging around people who are also hating the rich. And so whenever I would surf the web, whenever I would absorb content, whenever I would talk to people, I would be stacking more and more sides, more and more blocks on this side of the scale of hating the rich. And automatically, I'm placing more weights here. And that is one example of how confirmation bias can really start, can really lead you to putting more weights on the side that is already primed for the weight. And sometimes another way we can add more weights is without any new events happening. So for example, if I hate the rich, if I hate people who are prideful, who are braggarts, whatever it is, I can be sitting on my couch and I could not have met anyone new in my life. But me just thinking about, oh, I hate the rich. Oh, I hate people who are like assholes, oh, I hate people who are like braggarts, who are loud and brash and so extroverted. Again, I have not met anyone new who's extroverted. Nothing bad new that has happened. But just me sitting on the couch and me making new interpretations will cause me to place so many more weights on these scales without, again, any new events happening. But the point here is that over time, if you think about a particular subject here, any subject, we will eventually place a lot of weights on a lot of scales because we're always forming interpretations of something. And these weights that we place are usually biased towards one side. So you can tell eventually, so sure, we may place some weights here and there eventually on this side, but eventually you can tell that more of these weights as we live through life are going to get more jammed and more jammed and more jammed to one side, whether that's a good side or bad side, depending on what we're trying to think about. And that's basically just how our beliefs get stronger over time. Now, when our beliefs get stronger, that is when we form an identity with ourselves. So basically what we look at is we look at all these scales that we have, and we look at the scales that are tipped extremely to one side. So eventually, a belief becomes so strong that it becomes our identity. So it no longer becomes, I believe in being a Democrat. I believe in gun control. I believe in freedom of choice. I believe in whatever. To, I am a Trump supporter, or I am a Democrat. I am an introvert. I am whatever. This, when you define yourself as something, that is when the scale essentially becomes locked. The scale becomes locked and jammed, making it almost impossible to balance or restack that scale. So locking or jamming usually, again, happens very subconsciously and made worse via self-selective living. So, for example, if I'm a Democrat, I am more likely going to spend more time with other Democrats than a Republican, for example. If I look at a Trump speech, for example, and I'm a Democrat, and I'm very apolitical, guys, so don't use this as an example of like what my political beliefs are. But if I'm a Democrat and I look at Trump saying something, I will instantly hate on whatever Trump is saying and stack more weights. Because Trump can be saying the same thing, but half the population will love what he says and half the population will hate what he says. So the locking and jamming usually happens very subconsciously here. But basically, when enough weights are stacked to one side, it becomes your identity. And when it becomes your identity, it becomes locked or jammed, as we call. Now, once our identity is formed, we also reject the anti-identity. So once we define ourselves as I am a Democrat, you also automatically say, I'm not a Republican. And this is when you can see how this starts to create the separation between I am something and versus I am not something. And this is going to start to get worse via judgments and stubbornness, because if you try to talk politics to a Republican, for example, and you're a Democrat, and you try to convince someone why your ideas are better, it's an impossible conversation. It's very difficult to talk to someone when they have defined themselves as something and you are the opposite of that thing. No matter what you say, no matter what evidence you give, their scales are locked. They're not going to let you basically add weights to this side of the scale. They're locked in on that side of the scale. Their beliefs are locked. For you to make sure you understand this part, again, I want you to just take yourself through the 4 stages here and just think about how you have mental scales. All of you have mental scales. And you're always, with every interpretation, with every thought you have in your mind, you're always placing weights on one scale, on one other side of the scale, on many scales. And as you place more weights, these scales, you will tend to place more weights on the side of the scale that is already primed for. Once it becomes very tipped, it forms an identity. And once you form your identity, you form your anti-identity, and you start to judge your anti-identity. That is when you become in a state where you imprison yourself in your own mind. So let's talk about then what is so dangerous about this mental prison. So this next section is going to be a very important section, because I see a lot of people who ask me questions about like, but what if this happens? But what if that happens? What if I'm facing this? What if I'm facing that? And the people who ask those questions usually don't understand why a principle is important, or why or how a principle is connected. So I want you to see how this mental prison will really cause so much havoc in your life. So next time you see this havoc happening in your life, you're not confused about why it's happening. You understand that, oh, this is just a mental prison. So pause and think about each point that I make, and think about how this manifests in your life. Because if you don't pause and think, you will never see it. And all this stuff will just be mumbo jumbo to you. Okay. Number 1, this is the birth, the growth, and the stickiness of any low self-esteem, any bad paradigms like victim mindsets that you can find. This is how it's born. This is how it grows. And this is how it sticks over time. Okay. So let's, again, an example here. One thing that always stuck with me in my mind from a very young age was my sister. She's very artsy. She plays piano. She draws really well. She's, she was pursuing a career in fashion. And my belief was always that, Geoffrey, you're not the creative one in the family. You're the athletic one. Your sister is the creative one. And sure, my parents never said I'm not creative, but them constantly saying to my sister that she's the creative one makes me think I'm not the creative one. Because again, once you have a scale, you create the opposite scale. So once my parents say, I am the creative one, or my sister is the creative one, automatically in my mind, I'm thinking, hey, I'm not creative. So this becomes the birth of a victim mindset, the birth of a DOD, the birth of a BPV layer issue. This forms now a negative paradigm I have about myself. And this negative paradigm will poison the way I interpret my world. So for example, for me, right, because I have this belief, this paradigm that I'm not creative. I remember when I was starting this business and I needed to be creative, I needed to create a new system, a new curriculum. So the event is that I need to create a new curriculum. Well, my interpretation of that was, I'm not creative. Who the fuck do you think you are to think that you can do this? So because I interpreted that way based on my paradigms, I start to feel a bit scared, a bit intimidated. So here's an opportunity, an event that is supposed to be a good thing, that like, hey, this is an opportunity for you to do something creative, to start your new business. But I felt very, very scared. And I ended up not taking action in my business for 5 years because I was so scared because I felt so scared. And because of that, of course, the outcome is that nothing happens. The business never takes off. And when the business never takes off, I think to myself, well, this is a creative business and it never took off because I'm not creative. And this keeps feeding through. And you can see how this is how again, a negative self-belief was a seed. So the scales were stacked into one side a little bit. Over time, as I live through life and I make more and more interpretations of my life, you can see how this jam my scale even more, even more, even more, even more, even more, until now the scale is like, boom, locked in there. And once it's locked in there, you could not convince me that I was creative. That's it. That was my identity. My identity was I am not creative. And so I want you to think about any negative self-beliefs you have about yourself, life, your partner, and how they came about. And how these self-beliefs, not only do they screw up your life and your relationship, but really these self-beliefs, they're so locked in that it's really hard to convince you otherwise. And often this identity locking happens so strongly that most people don't even know they have this negative self-belief, which is why, again, in our program, the concept of having a community that really are able to point your blind spots is so crucial, because you don't even know what these negative self-beliefs are, because you just made it part of your identity so deep within your subconscious that you can never realize it even when it's there. Another reason why this mental prison is so bad is that it robs us of a lot of richness in life and relationships. So imagine this gray circle to be basically the full spectrum of life that you can experience. And because you have locked yourself into this identity, you stay stuck here. So, for example, for me, in my life, because I've locked in myself as an introvert, as someone who's not creative, as someone who's not, for example, I'm not a good dancer, for example. I'm not a dancer. I'm not an expressive dude. I'm not a feminine dude, for example. I don't know how to be feminine and be compassionate. There were so many hobbies. There were so many things, or so many experiences that I could have done in my life that I could never do because it went against who I thought I was. It went against my beliefs. So, there's so many people in life who, where they only like a certain kind of humor. They only like a certain kind of food. They only like a certain kind of movies. And their taste of life is so limited to their circle that they, think about all the things all the humor, all the experiences they could have missed out on if they just learned to expand this thing. But not only that, this is also robs you probably of so many experiences in your relationship. So when my partner and I met, we decided, okay, I think we're similar in these ways. We're different in these ways. We're different in these ways. We're similar in these 3 ways, but we're different in, let's say, these 5 ways or 6 ways, whatever it is. So what happens was we started to go on dates, and we would do the same things during our dates. We would go to the same places, go to the same types of restaurants, watch the same kind of movies, talk about the same kinds of things. Now, at first, this is wonderful and all, but eventually it starts to get fucking boring after like 5 or 10 years of talking about and doing the same things. And so a lot of people complain about being with their partners for like 10 years, and they feel like they know everything about their partner. They feel like they've done everything with their partner. They lose that spark. They lose that novelty. They lose that sense of magic, that newness, that sense of mystery that the relationship brings, is because so many of them are locked in on their own scales. And so what happens to them is that if it's the same, great, we can do those things. But if it's different, no one is budging to where no one is making this red into a green. So again, you've locked yourself into a certain subsegment of experiences, and you've locked yourself out of all these experiences that you could have done. And so for us, once we unjammed these scales, now, whenever we go on dates, we never do the same thing ever again, because we are so open. Both of us are so open to doing all kinds of things. And now basically what happens is, if this is the full richness that life can give you, now you access so much more. You can do whatever the fuck you want, kind of thing, right? That is powerful. So I think of relationships almost like an orchestra, right? So let's say you are a violin player and you only like violin, you hate trumpet, you hate saxophone, you hate the cello. Well, you know what? Your symphony will just be a bunch of violin players, which that's kind of a shitty symphony. But if you start to learn how to appreciate the saxophone, the cello, and all these other parts of life that you can appreciate, other instruments that you can appreciate, you can start to build a very rich symphony. And same thing for relationship. If you only think like certain things are good, certain things are bad, and you are so locked in, your scales are so jammed, you've just locked into like, okay, I can only have 3 instruments here. Yeah, it's great for a while, but after a while, you're like, the amount of music, the types of music we can create is very limited. People and yourself will get bored of it eventually. Okay. So pause and think about how this jam scales and your mental prison has robbed you from so much richness in life and so much appreciation in life, your relationships, your partner, etc. This is really bad, guys. Number 3 is a blocker to curiosity, compassion, and deep inner standing. So, whenever you go around, men always complain that women are very confusing, that they can't figure out their women. And a lot of men, they get really upset when their woman tells them, hey, you're not listening. Or I feel like you're not listening to me, when the man has really tried to listen. When you have jam scales, your brain is tuned basically to the wrong frequency. The frequency of your brain is to tell, explain, and justify, not really to be curious and listen and understand and ask questions. Another example of this is also how this will ruin your ability to use the frameworks. So a lot of questions surround around like, how do you deal with a topic that ignite both parties' anger, etc. And here's Tracy, one of my clients. Sorry, I don't know why it's so blurry. She basically says, I came in thinking I've been working on my pies, etc. I need for communication. So she just said when she joined the program, just teach me what to say. As you know, smart contact didn't work. In fact, running away from relationship issues actually made it worse. But I didn't have the conviction, whatever. My questions were mostly manipulative or loaded. It wasn't until I realized the value of shift in mindset that I realized how intertwined everything was. But it starts with the mindset. Without the mindset, you won't dedicate your time to the program. Without the mindset, you can't see your own failings. Without the mindset, you don't have the strength or poise to carry out frameworks. And without the mindset, you don't come across from a place of genuine caring. You can't repeat your process over and over again, etc. Working my mindset has been my game changer. And so I think for a lot of people in having relationship issues, the issue of compatibility or the issue of having differences of opinions, of direction, is a very big issue that is often a deal breaker for a lot of people. So for my own relationship, there were actually 3 very big deal breakers that we had in our own relationship. One was the topic of children. When I got with my partner, I did not want any children, and she wanted 1 kid. For a lot of people, that would have been a very deal breaker type of difference. But again, that's because a lot of people approach this with very jammed scales in their thinking. They're coming to the conversation by saying, okay, here's why I believe that not having kids is better. And their partner goes, here's why I believe having kids is better. And so they're just kind of talking, here's why I believe what I believe, here's why I believe what I believe, and they end up butting heads here. Nothing is happening. But it just took for our relationship 1 conversation where instead of me trying to explain my side to her, me explaining what I believe to her, I asked her instead, okay, so my scale is tipped to one side here where I really believe having no kids is better. But let me try to explore and stack weights on the other side here, where I think, what is the value of kids? How could kids be beautiful here? How could kids be the right move? And so I asked my partner, hey, so you want kids? Can you tell me more about children that makes you want children? Like, what do you envision? What do you see? How does it make you feel? And I realized that as this goes on, I start to stack more weights on the other side of the scale. And now, 9 years later, I want 3 kids, and she still wants 1. So the scales have stacked the other way. Another example of this could be like any big life decisions that you have. So my partner and I, obviously, the longer you're together, the more you have big life decisions that really differ from the both of you. But instead of going through the conversations explaining why my decision was a better decision, I asked her. So there was one time when we were deciding whether to move to Houston or some other city, for example. And I didn't want to move to Houston. But instead of saying to her, hey, here's why Houston is a bad idea, I asked her, so you really want to move to Houston, and I know you worry about XYZ, the same things I worry about, but it doesn't seem that the things I worry about is really bothering you. Can you tell me more about why you love Houston, why you think Houston is the right move to go? What makes you, how does Houston make you feel, etc.? And that is how we eventually got the conversation to define where we can find a win-win. And we got to a deeper understanding of each other as well from that conversation. And we did the same thing with other interests, other values that we differ, whether it's political, religious values. Instead of me imposing my side on her, I just took the time to understand her side. And I basically balanced my scales there, if that makes sense. And so this is how a lot of my clients that you hear giving interviews, how they align on a topic of having children or not having children, for example. For example, like Spencer Davis is a great example of this. This is how they do it. They use the frameworks, but they back up the frameworks with a very heavy, unjammed mind, and they got out of prison first of their own mind. And from that, everything they ask, everything they do in their frameworks becomes a lot more genuine, becomes a lot more productive as well. And so I'm going to say something very controversial here in that I don't think any compatibility issues actually exist in relationships. Any compatibility issues exist because people do not understand how to discuss through their compatibility issues and understand at the end of the day that you're just driven by the same things. So, for example, for my case with the kids example, we discovered eventually that it's not really kids she wanted, but it's that feeling of being able to nurture something, being able to see something grow because of you. Um, the concept of passing down your genetics, your legacy to a future generation that she really wanted. So it's not really about the kids, it was about what the kids meant. But if you talk about nurturing something, creating effects beyond your generation, that was something I wanted too. So initially, on the surface, this concept of I want kids and you and me, I don't want kids seems to be a very incompatible difference. But once we dug deeper into it, we realized that we're really just wanting the same things here. Now, the how of how we go about it is different, but once we connect it to the fact that we want the same things in life, the whole conversation around goal alignment become a lot easier at the end of the day. So I really don't think compatibility issues exist. Well, if you have compatibility issues, it's usually because you do not understand how to lead a conversation from the right internal shifts with the right approach to get to the deeper thing behind the thing that connects the both of you. Is a conversation staying very surface level at the level of the difference, not the level of the similarity, if that makes sense. So most couples never realize, I think, because they never learned this stuff, just how compatible, how much potential for alignment the relationship actually had. So I want you to pause and think here about how this mental prison has led to so many layers of misunderstandings, confusion, lack of safety, and a very negative cycle with your partner. And the worst part about this, guys, is that this negative cycle is very real. If, let's say, in my life, I never really paused to think about, I know the merits to my side, but what is the merits to her side? And I just kept imposing my side. That will destroy a lot of safety in my partner. And she will tell me less stuff. When she tells me less stuff, I understand her less. When I understand her less, I make more the wrong assumptions, which makes her feel more unsafe, and so on and so on and so on. And this is a cycle that a lot of people are in right now. Number 4 is holds us back from our true potential and success. This is a really big one, and I'm sure many of you can relate to this. So way back when I was I was actually a data scientist. So I was very introverted. I worked with data a lot. I don't really talk to people a lot. But when I wanted to become a coach, I knew that I needed to become someone who's not shy in front of a camera, who's very extroverted in a way, who talks to a lot of people, thousands of people at a time sometimes. And so who I am versus who I need to become was very different. But every single time I tried to become who I wanted to become, something pulled me back in. It was the feeling of imposter syndrome. Like, I'm not really this extroverted person. I'm not really this person who's really like a showy and stuff like that. I'm not really a person who can make videos and who can like be charismatic in front of a camera. It's not really who I am. And it felt fake to me. So who I wanted to become felt fake to me. It's because, again, I was trying to become someone different from my jam scales, from my conviction of what I believe was right and wrong. So, for example, I used to judge a lot of people who are very outspoken, who, like those social media people who keep sharing their posts. I am doing this today. I am doing that today. Here's what's in my thoughts. Here's what's here. What's here. I used to judge people like that because, again, my identity was that I'm not someone who brags, and therefore I judge people who brag. But this person who I needed to become was also the kind of people who needed to become someone who shares their thoughts a lot, right? But the problem is that because I judge other people who share their thoughts a lot, whenever I try to share my thoughts, I judge myself. And I feel this imposter syndrome. And I'm sure a lot of you are in a state where you may be thinking about a job that you want, a career that you want, a business that you want, a lifestyle that you want. But every time you try to become that person, something holds you back. And you can never truly become that. And so you end up waiting for your circumstance to change for you to make it easy for you to become that before you become that. That's a recipe for failure. And so the reason why I think a lot of people cannot really accomplish big things in their life that require a very different lifestyle, that require a very different state of being, they cannot. They can only iterate better, but they cannot become revolutionary, different, and better. It's because of this, because you have jam scales. So again, think about how these jam scales has really prevented you from fully becoming who you need to become. Okay. Same thing for the relationship. I was someone who was not very romantic before. Whenever it came to the bedroom, for example, I was always very shy. I was always very unexpressive. I was not very communicative. And so the whole concept of like the seductive men, the Italian seductive men, the French seductive men, whenever I would watch soap opera, stuff like that, I would get really cringy when I see these men behave that way. So when I needed to become someone like that in my own life, I started to have all these voices in my head that made me feel cringe and pulled me back. And so I knew what I wanted was to have a better sex life, but I could never become the man to get that better sex life because of my jam scales, because my identity was so imprisoned in a way. Number 5, it robs us of curiosity and humility needed for success and learning. It's funny because I see so many comments like this, right? Of people stating their opinions about their case, about how life works, about their relationship, about their partner. Women are horrible communicators, whatever it is. And they seem so sure about it. It's almost, again, as if their scales are so jammed, they made it their identity to believe in that thing, and they don't let other people stack their weight. So they're busy explaining, not really listening to other points of view, to other opinions, to the merits of the other side. To be honest, guys, this is like going to Warren Buffett and saying, hey, I haven't really invested $1 in my life, but Warren, let me tell you my opinions about investing that I think you should know. That is fucking insanity, guys. That is fucking insane if you do that, right? So these people are here. I want to ask them, basically, how many marriages have you saved? And how many marriages have we saved? So is it really that you need to tell us? So is it really that we need to listen to you and you need to tell us what you think? Or is it that you need to listen to what other people think? Because maybe what you think is not the right way because what you think has gotten you to where you are. So again, it's that frequency discussion again, where if your scales are so jammed, your frequency is never going to be tied into listening and learning. It's always going to be tied into telling, explaining, and justifying. And a lot of these people are not going to know they're doing this. And a lot of you looking at this might think, for example, oh, that's not me. I don't say this kinds of stuff. But you'll be very surprised at what we see people say in our application interviews, for example, of how certain people are about certain ideas, about their belief in their values, their opinions, etc., about their case, and how shut off they are from putting rocks on the other side. Another great example of this is people who still, even though I tell them in every single video, hey, no situation is unique, and here's why. And many of my clients saying, here's why no situation is unique, and here's why it's not unique. Because again, everything is just a safety issue. Like if I ask people, for example, if you had created safety, would your partner still leave? The answer is no. If you create safety, would your partner, sure, you have problems, but would your partner come back to you because she knows that you are the person to work through the problems with? They often say yes. And they still ask the question, but I feel like my situation is unique. So again, their scales are stacked in a way where they think, they're convinced their situation is unique. And they will see whatever evidence to support that the situation is unique. And no matter how many rocks we place on the other side, or we try to place on the other side, they're never going to take it. They're going to shut everything out, right? That's the danger of jam scales again. So I want you to think about how jam scales have robbed you of so many opportunities to learn and grow from important realizations. The thing is that people who don't know what they don't know, and the worst is that they'll probably never know how much they don't know, because their brains are never tuned to find out what they don't know, because they're jammed, the scales are jammed, and they don't even know they're rejecting more weights here on the other side. Number 6, it will render autosuggestions useless. So when you look at the structure of the autosuggestions and trying to create your bulletproof vest, this right here, if you think about it, requires you to basically look at the rocks you've stacked and see the absurdity of the way you stacked your rocks. And this right here needs you to stack the rocks on the other side. So if you have jammed scales, you have locked your scales, you will find that doing this autosuggestion process is going to be very, very difficult for you. Which is why, for a lot of my clients, they post their work a lot so they can understand how they can blindly sometimes find out how they've accidentally jammed their scales to one side or the other, and to unjam that scale. So I want you to pause here and think about how your mental prison and your jam scales have really prevented you from transforming your identity, your paradigms in massive ways. There's this client here on the left where he's basically complaining about, hey, I'm making these autosuggestions, but I'm having a hard time feeling it. So, and he's basically saying, like, no matter how much I tell myself that resistance is an opportunity, that, hey, divorce is not that bad, for example, that divorce is actually a good thing because now you know about the problems and that this is the time for you to shine, I can never feel it. So the thing I said to him was, well, whatever you feel feels right to you. Remember that feelings come from the way we interpret life. So while feelings feels right for you, it may not always be right. Because if I was in your situation, I would interpret it very differently than you, and thus would feel very differently from you as well. So ask yourself, whatever you feel, is it based on truth, or is it based on the same paradigms that got you here in the first place? An example I gave is, a depressed person will always feel like life sucks. And there is no talking them out of it because they're convinced their view of the world is 100% accurate and objective. But is it? Or is it because they refuse to let go of the existing ways they currently view the world? So when you have jam scales, and let's say your jam scales are that you believe that certain victim mindsets, certain DODs that you feel are correct, those DODs and victim mindsets will always feel correct to you. And they'll always feel correct to you because your scales have been jammed to believing that that is correct. But doing this requires to stack weights on the other side of that scale, where you have to force yourself to think about, this VM, this DOD, how is it wrong? How has it fucked me in the past? And what is the merit to the other side? And if you have jam scales, you'll find that it's very difficult to do that. So if you have issues changing your paradigms in a meaningful way with what we've discussed so far, a big reason is that you probably have really jam scales. And number 7, it makes us and the relationships very unadaptable. So you can look at this in a micro sense or a macro sense. So if you look at my day, for example, right? So I wake up, and when I wake up, I walk the dogs, I spend time with my family, I have breakfast with them sometimes, I have coffee with them at least, black coffee at least. And so this is my very feminine time. And I also meditate as well, so very feminine time. Then I gear up for work and coaching. That is very feminine, that is very masculine time. And then I go into group coaching, very masculine time. I finish work, I wind down, and I read a book, very feminine time. And then I spend time with family, my dogs, spend this family, very feminine time, very compassionate time. And so here, even when it comes to the masculine feminine scale, I am switching hour by hour my masculine femininity here. So when you have jam scales, though, I'm sure a lot of people struggle with this problem of they go to work, for example, they come home and they're not really able to let go of work and be in dad mode and be in husband mode. And then when they go to the bedroom later, they struggle to switch from being dad mode into being seductive husband, romantic partner mode, right? And if you, a lot of you struggle with this, the problem is that, again, you have such a locked identity that when the circumstance requires you to change your identity, you cannot change it because your identity is so locked in. And so it makes you very unsuccessful even within a given day. But you can look at this in a macro sense too. You know, every stage of life, you are required to become someone different. And so if you cannot become someone different because you are locked in, then that is how people get midlife crisis. That is how people grow apart. That is how people like thrive in the beginning, for example, but later struggle when they become dads, when they become husbands, etc., because they haven't really changed the identity that is required to become successful in that new role. And just like in evolution in life, those who are not adaptable die. So relationship is like an organism basically, right? If your relationship does not know how to adapt to the different stages, it will die. If you yourself do not know how to adapt to your different stages of life, different parts of your day, you will die. Same thing here. So the key to adaptability, or the key reason why people are not adaptable is again because of locked scales. You have locked your identity so much that you cannot change something outside of it. You cannot change it. So this shouldn't be difficult, but pause and think about how this manifests in your own life and how this has caused so much havoc in your life and your relationship. And if you think about it too, this jam scales is really the cause of so much suffering and conflict in the world. Every time someone debates and gets protests, right? What is the protest about? The protest is about, I am blank, I am an identity, and you are hurting me, right? So this sense of identity creation, or the wrong identity that people have created, is really the source of so much unhappiness, so much conflict in this world. So with that said, I know we've talked a lot about the why the mental prison is so bad. And to be honest, this is not the exhaustive list of why the mental prison is so bad. In our program, we have many hours of content designed to teach you this in a very clear way of what this is, but also why this is so bad. But I also want to give you a taste of what it takes to get out of the mental prison. So the best thing you can do is to actually, what we call, stop jerking off your hypothetic mind. So you have to understand that in life, there's two kinds of mindset. There is hypothetic mindset and it's antithetic mindset. The hypothetic mindset is when you look at your ideas of what you know, what you believe today, and you are hell-bent on believing that is right. So this is you basically, if you look at the scale again, so let's say this represents the scale that we talked about. Let's say your scales are stacked very heavily onto this side right here. This is you just circle jerking yourself to put more weights on this side. So you're essentially jamming yourself more and more and more and more. So if I look at those people earlier on who seems to be so certain about their ideas, about what they think is right, these are basically people who are very hypothetic in their nature, and they're circle jerking their hypothetic mind. And with these people, the problem is that they will never see just how wrong they could be. So, for example, this guy, some women don't like to be reflected. They then see their flaws and then they think you're pointing them out in her. So, this guy really believes in his scales that women do not like to be reflected because every time he tries to reflect women, women didn't like that. So, what we said to him was, in the same way, is it that the women in your life don't want to be reflected, or is it that they don't want to be reflected by you? Because you make so many negative assumptions about them, about who women are, etc. Let me move this Zoom thing. But maybe they just don't like to be reflected by you because you make them feel unsafe. So with this guy, his reality is going to be, his paradigm is that women don't like to be reflected. So that will change the way he interprets the world. So I could be teaching him some things about how to reflect women properly. He will reject it. He will then feel very defeated whenever he needs to reflect women. He probably will not reflect women, which makes women not feel understood. When the women don't feel understood, feel less safe, it then confirms his idea that women don't like to be reflected. because whenever he tries to reflect women, women don't like it. And there is no sense here. There's no place here where he will ever see the antithesis to his hypothesis. There is never a time when he will look at his scales and go, I believe this is right, but what if I'm wrong? And there's so many other things that we notice that people are so hypothetic on, they don't realize they're hypothetic on. So I made a video on this before, but some people who are not even in the program, they really judge us for having our tough love approach. And I've made a video on our tough love approach and why we do it. And so for these people who judge us on our tough love, they really are convinced that we are doing tough love out of the bad reasons that they think about. So they just carry this thought with them forever, and they don't let anyone change their mind about anything. So they will forever just hate on us for showing our tough love. And if you look at that video, you will see that the reason why we give tough love is that this is a journey of self-reflection. This is a journey of seeing through your blind spots. And sometimes you won't see through your blind spots until someone basically shoves your head and points out the blind spot to you, right? Because again, your partner has been trying to show and tell you about your blind spots, but the reason why your partner feels very hopeless usually is because no matter what they do to try to let you see your blind spots, you can never see it. In fact, whenever they try to let you see your blind spots, you paint them as a villain. So this is another example of someone jerking off their hypothetic mind and not letting other people stack rocks on the other side or stack weights on the other side here. Another example of this, one final example, is if you look at the testimonial with Tracy earlier, you'll see that, and when she first joined the program, she didn't think that she needed to work on the internal shifts because she thought her internal shifts was good. But we kept telling her, hey, your internal shifts are actually not that good. Listen to us. So her rocks, her weights are stacked this way where she is convinced her internal shifts is enough. And she wouldn't let us stack weights on the other side here until she stops jerking off this hypothetic mind and adding more weights on this side until she added more weights on this side. That is when everything starts to change for her. And she starts to realize, maybe there's some truth to this. So the first step to really, if you want to get out of your mental prison here, is just to have a conscious effort to stop circle jerking your hypothetic mind. Understand that your beliefs today is what got you to where you are today. If you want to go someplace different, you need to have very different beliefs about the world, about your life, etc. And I have no doubt that your beliefs will seem like they're real, like they're right, like they're justified, like they're the best beliefs to you. But once you explore the other side, you will see that there's another side to the story. Another example of this, okay? I gave the story when my wife and I was going to Canada. And during that trip, we have a Range Rover, and my parents were going to that trip too. My parents are the kinds of Asians that pack up really heavy suitcases for a short trip. So my partner, instead of having two suitcases, our stuff in two suitcases, she stuffed all our stuff in one suitcase, meaning my stuff and my partner's stuff in one big suitcase that weighed 80 something pounds, I think. So this is not even the $100 overage fee. This is a $250 overage fee. So my hypothetic mind at that point was telling me, Samantha is wasteful. Samantha doesn't know the value of money. Maybe she's taking the money that we earn for granted, etc. Until I stopped jerking that off and I go, what is the other side to this? What is the other side here? Sorry, what is the other side here? And I asked her, why did you do that? And when I asked her that, I realized that her intention of why she stuffed into one suitcase was that we have a Range Rover, and so the Range Rover wouldn't fit all the suitcases, including my parents. So in order to give my parents enough space in a suitcase, she packed all our stuff in one suitcase to make room for my parents. So there I was, right? Almost jerking off my hypothetic mind, but I didn't. And I found the antithesis, the value to the other side. But if I didn't have that, if I kept jerking off my hypothetic mind, I might never find the true answer, the real answer. And I will forever think my wrong answer was the right answer for fucking ever. And so whenever you hear anything that I say in my videos, etc., or even if you look at this, the way we run our application process, a lot of people have problems with how difficult our application process is. You're going to have some narratives in your head about why we do the things we do that makes you feel all sorts of ways. Don't jerk that off. Don't jerk it off. Jerk off the other side. Okay. The second thing you can do is really pay attention to how you judge yourself and the world, because how you judge yourself and the world will really reveal how your scales are stacked and what jam scales you have. Because when you judge something in the world, that is something you judge in yourself as well. And vice versa, when you judge something in yourself, that is something you judge about the world. So in the previous example, because I judge the world for being too expressive, for example, whenever I try to be expressive, I judge myself too. And that expressiveness was a jam scale that I have that I needed to balance. So look at who and what do you often judge. So you look at, for example, your partner, even my business, even me right now, you've been probably making a lot of judgments about me. What are you judging? And what you judging reflects more about you and your jam scales than it does about me or the subject you're judging. So pay attention to how you judge and stuff the world, because that will tell you a lot about how you jam your scales. And this is going to show also how you lock your scales as well. Number 3 is then I want you to balance your scales by being antithetic. So not only do I want you to stop jerking off your hypothetic side, I want you to start jerking off your antithetic side. So add weights on this side as well. Don't forget about this side, right? And this is a lifestyle choice that I have. So anytime I see something that I don't understand or I don't agree with, my initial instinct is not to dump my weights on the other person. My initial instinct is to ask the other person, how can you stack weights on my side here, on my other side here? So for example, whenever I hire a mentor or I hire a coach, and the coach is saying or doing something that I don't agree with, I don't understand. So the coach is doing the opposite here. My instinct is not to go, let me explain to you, coach, how to do things, right? But my initial instinct is to go, what am I missing? How could they be right? What can they teach me? What is the value of the other side? The same thing when I see my partner is sometimes making decisions that I don't agree with, I don't understand. My thing is not to be hypothetic. My instinct is to be antithetic. Have my partner feel this side. So sometimes in our program, when clients come in and they try to give us feedback on how to run our business, it tells me that their mind is not really tuned towards being antithetic. Their mind is geared towards being hypothetic and dumping their stuff on us, right? And that's not going to make a very good client. The same way when we tell someone, hey, your situation is not unique, it's not dire, and they tell us basically, hey, you don't understand, Jeff, here's what I mean, you don't understand my situation, that tells me that they're more interested in expressing their hypothetic mind and getting the world to understand their hypothetic mind. And they're not really interested in understanding other people's antithetic perspectives of their hypothesis. So this is just a habit thing. Always be very antithetic. And you can do this with art, you can do this with movies, you can do this with politics, you can do this with anything in life. So, for example, if you're pro-choice, then maybe you need to ask someone who is pro-life and think about, okay, what is the antithesis here? If you hate country music, which I used to hate country music, then spend time with some country folk and ask them and really explore the antithesis, the value of the other side. And this is a lifestyle thing. And as you do this, you will find that your scale will be more balanced over time, right? And when your scale is balanced, you don't lock yourself in as much. And you can find that you can hang out with anybody you want and be in harmony. You can be as masculine as feminine. You can be as extroverted as introverted as you want. So you can be adaptable. You can fluidly move. And just like Bruce Lee said, right? Be like water. When the water becomes a cup, you become the cup. When the water becomes a vase, you become the vase. When the water becomes a box, you become a box. Be like water. It can flow. You have to flow like water. And that's the key to unlocking yourself and really seeing the value of not being in that mental prison. What I want you to think about next is what we call expanding your band of operation. So I want you to imagine here that this is, again, the spectrum of life that you can experience. And this is your band right now because you're so jammed. This is your band. Now, what happens when you expand your band of operation is that you're almost like a video game character who is rounding out their character. So if you look at, like, for example, like the video game skills wheel, right? The skills wheel is not just about like, oh, I am let's see, charismatic, but I don't have any like strength. I don't have any intelligence, anything like that. If you are only charismatic and you have jammed yourself like that to only see the world in a certain way and only like certain things, dislike certain things, etc., you're basically robbing yourself of many different ways you can play the game. You can only play the game in a charismatic way. But let's say you expand all your other skills, all your other personality traits. Now you can play the game however the fuck you want, right? So, for example, here, if I slide this way, so I make a new one. Let's see, style. So basically, right, if you want to play the game with your charisma, you can. If you want to play the game with your strength, you can. If you want to play the game with your intelligence, you can. You have a lot more fluidity in the way you want to play your game. But it starts with expanding your band of operation. In our program, the way we do this is by a lot of methods. But one is by putting yourself in things and doing things and exploring ideas, thoughts, philosophies that you have never experienced before, that you never thought of before, and allowing yourself to see the full spectrum of pros and cons to that thing. And a great example of this is even something black and white, like let's say greed and generosity, for example. Generosity. So a lot of people will say that greed is obviously bad, but generosity is obviously good, right? But it's not the case, because I've known some people, some entrepreneurs who are so scared to be greedy, and they're so generous to the point where they're so generous, they keep giving their shit for free, that they don't have any money, so they have to shut down their business, and then now they cannot give the value of being generous anymore. Well, you look at someone who is more balanced. Like, let's look at Jeff Bezos, okay? Jeff Bezos, yeah, people hate him because he's greedy as fuck, right? I mean, yeah, there's a greed side to him. But because he's greedy, he's able to create a company so big and so massive that is so valuable that he is creating more value than any other person on the planet right now. So greed and generosity, even if you look at what seems like black and white topics, is not that black and white. There's pros and cons to being generous. There's pros and cons to being greedy. The answer always lies in the middle, in the balance of these two, that you get the most. Because Jeff Bezos is greedy, he can be generous. Because he's generous, he can also be greedy, and vice versa. And so this is us basically looking at life from that perspective of nothing is good or bad. Everything is just pros and cons. And think about this for any philosophy, any worldview you have. Nothing is good or bad. They're just pros and cons. And so this is how I've learned to expand my band on appreciating so many parts of music, of movies, of life, of relationship styles, of people's personalities, in my own personalities, my own traits, etc. I value all traits, and I balance all my skills, and I expand my band of operation so that when I need to be feminine, there is no blocker for me to being feminine. When I need to be masculine, there's no blocker for me to be masculine. When I need to be seductive, there's no blocker for me to be seductive, because I have appreciated seductive, stoic. I've appreciated masculine, feminine. I've appreciated introvertedness, extrovertedness, and I can become anything, anywhere, all at once, basically. And this is the definition of true freedom, is when you have expanded your band of operation. As we say, true freedom is not being who you are and avoiding who you're not. True freedom is about becoming whoever the fuck you want to become so that you can be successful at that thing, right? So once you expand your band of operation like this, then you need to define your becoming self and live by it. So once you expand your band of operation, you can now choose to decide who you want to be for a given moment. And this becoming self changes by, again, the macro events of your life. The becoming self changes by the micro events in your life. In a particular day, I have multiple becoming selves. But I can play all these becoming selves very well because I have first expanded my band of operation. If I haven't, if I'm locked in here, and let's say I need to become these 4 things, but my band is here, I can only become this one thing. I cannot become these 3 things, right? The doors unlock when you expand your band of operation. That is when you can define your becoming self properly and you can live by it. Okay. So obviously there is a lot of nuance to these 5 things that I'm teaching you here. That is way too long for this video, but if you want to learn more, again, we have the program where you can dive really deep into it. But again, if you cannot afford the program or cannot join the program for any reason, then leave a comment below. Ask your bloody questions, right? I'm creating this video not to get sales. I'm creating this video obviously to help you guys. Like, I'm not getting much from this. Not a lot of people watch these long form videos anyway. It's not very popular because it's too long. People want quick fixes. And when you do this, what happens is it inspires reciprocity from your partner. So what happens here, very interestingly, is almost like when you start, you will begin to change the environment. When you change the environment, you'll begin to change your partner as well. And your partner will then change the environment back, and that will change you. For example, for my case, when my partner sees that I was trying to live like this, right? When I, let's say, approach conversations by not circle jerking my hypothetic mind, by not judging her, by exploring the antithesis, that actually lowers the guard for my partner, creates safety, lowers the guard for my partner to where she is now more willing to ask me those same questions and reciprocate as well. Now, of course, this reciprocation from your partner is not going to be instant. Sometimes you'll go through what we call paradox of change. We'll talk about that. We've talked about that in other videos before, where sometimes the reciprocity might take months, because when you change the environment at first, your partner's going to be very suspicious, and rightfully so. But eventually, in the long term, you are going to change your partner's behavior too. And that's a bonus, where that will make it easier for you to do the right thing. And if you are convinced that your partner's different somehow, your relationship is different somehow, think about what you're saying here. If you're saying that even when you create the perfect environment, your partner is so idiotic that she will not take the perfect environment you gave and reciprocates in a good way, think about how much safety you're destroying with that insinuation. I mean, imagine if you in a position where, if you in your partner's position now, where your partner thinks so lowly of you that even when you're given the perfect environment, your partner still thinks you're so fucked up that you're not going to change. How much safety can you feel? So do you see the irony there, right? So these are the 5 things you can do. And our clients, they live by this every single moment, which brings me to my next part, which is the key misconceptions people have about this. So I want you to run through 5 common misconceptions here. This is really the key to being genuine. A lot of people think like, well, if I'm basically trying to become whoever I want to become, I have no identity, all my balance are my skills are balanced. That's not me being genuine. Then who I am? Then who am I? Right? So for this, I want to give you an example here. So let's say, okay, you have a person here. I'm sure your wife sometimes wants you to do, like, go to Sephora, for example, go to Ulta Beauty, go shopping with me. And you have defined yourself as someone who doesn't like to go shopping, who doesn't like makeup. So you begrudgingly say, you know what, I don't like to go to makeup, so let me just go anyway. Versus a guy who says, you know what, I may not like makeup now, but let me go and try to find a way that I can love makeup and shopping with my wife. So this guy goes to shopping begrudgingly. This guy goes to shopping happily. Who is more genuine, this guy or this guy? So if you want to live the most genuine life, unjamming your mind is really it. Okay. Second thing, this is not being a yes man. This is just what great leaders do. So when I say, for example, hey, explore the other side, I don't mean just say yes to everything. If you look at great leaders, the way they operate by a few stages, right? They understand everything first. They ask questions first. And once they expand the possibility of everything that could happen, then they make a decision. Same thing that happens to us, right? When we expand our band of operation, we're expanding. We're expanding so that we can choose who we want to become. When I'm talking with my wife about whether to have kids or not, I am expanding both our understanding of everything, of all the pros and cons, so that we both can make a decision on what the right decisions are, right? The reason why a lot of people cannot get to a win-win is because they never talk about both sides. So it's just butting heads, but nobody can see each other's side. And it's almost like with at work too, right? If I tell my employees to do something without telling them why, they're gonna do it, but they're gonna do it begrudgingly. And sometimes they're not even gonna do it. They're gonna follow through because they don't understand the why. But if I tell them, for example, hey, here's the problem we have right now. Let's lay out all the potential pros and cons of whatever decisions we have. And so now that we have the pros and cons of all decisions, let's together make a decision. Everyone can be on board on a decision. It's just a better way to do things. So it's not a yes man. It's let me understand so we all can make a win-win decision that we all can agree on better. Number 3, this one's a big one. Antitheses are by definition in your blind spot. So as you're watching this video, no doubt your mind is going a million miles an hour. A lot of this stuff, you may not even understand what I mean by this stuff or how this 8 things really manifest in your life. Because again, a lot of this stuff lies in your blind spot, guys. And so the value of the program is really understanding, being around a community, a set of coaches who can point things in your blind spot, who can point things to how you're blindly falling for hypothetic thinking, for example, how you have blindly jammed scales, how your blind jam scales leads to you blindly making mistakes here and there, how you're blindly making mistakes in the small things you say, small things you do here and there that you may not realize in a million years. And that's the full value of it. Number 4, becoming self will never become, and being misunderstood is a rite of passage. So this becoming self that we talk about is not really something you do once. It's something you do constantly. So let's say you're level 1 right now and you want to become level 5. By the time you become level 5, you should have another level 10 in mind. When you become level 10, you should have another level 15 in mind. You're always becoming. You will never have become. But because of that, a lot of my clients feel this resistance from other people never really understanding them. Because like when you are, let's say at level 5 and you want to become level 10, well, other people's perspective of you is really still at level 1. But by the time you can become level 10, their version of you is still, their view of you is still level 5, but you are now on to level 15. So people, the world will always be behind you. So you will never really feel understood. The same way, for example, for my program, right? So for in my head, it's really level 50. But because the current program has been made like a year ago, and it takes time for me to revamp the program, people think my program is still level 10, right? But by the time I catch people up to level 50 here, level 50, my program will be at level 100. And people will only perceive my program at level 50. People will never have the right understanding of where I actually am. But that's the rite of passage of becoming. So any successful person you see will always tell you that success is lonely at the top. And it's lonely precisely because no one really understands where you are. No one really understands who you are. And I'm sure you feel this with your family too. Like I recently saw my family after 15 years of not seeing them. And I've grown so much in the 15 years I haven't seen them, but they still think I was still a teenager. They act as if my mindset is still a teenager. They don't know who I am. They don't know what I stand for. They don't know my values. They don't know how much I've become. But that's a rite of passage. And so the thing that I always tell my clients is, would you rather be understood but be a failure, or would you rather be misunderstood but be successful? Your choice. You cannot have both. You need to have one or the other. And it's not something you do, but this must become a lifestyle. So all these things that we said, having an antithetic mind, expanding your band of operation, live according to your becoming self, that's something that never ends. That's like lifestyle change. And so that's another place where the community, the program really helps, is that when you surround yourself with people who have made this a lifestyle, it makes it easier for you to live this as a lifestyle. The same way, if you want to live a lifestyle of being an entrepreneur, you need to surround yourself with entrepreneurs because you need to make that into a lifestyle. A lifestyle is how you do the small things in your life, not the big things, the small things in your life, the little nuances. Like, for example, if you're trying to be an entrepreneur, that should define how you eat, how you sleep, what media you choose to watch, what you think about every day, your standards of what you deem to be okay and not okay, your integrity, all these little things. You need to surround yourself with a lot of people to make it fully into a lifestyle yourself. Okay. So I know that was a crazy heavy video, but I hope that was helpful for you in some aspects to really understand how much more there is to internal shift than what we have discussed via untethering, via victim mindset, for example, that this internal shifts conversation can get very, very advanced, very, very quick. So if you want to explore this more advanced topics behind internal shifts, I have a masterclass for you. That masterclass is about an hour and a half long. At the end of the masterclass, if you want to apply for the program, we show you how to apply for the program in the masterclass. So in the program is where we really can dive deep into all these very nuanced, very advanced self-growth, internal shift techniques that can really yield wonders in so many parts of your marriage, of your relationship, etc. So with that said, guys, I hope that was helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.